Why? People ask how it felt when my world collapsed. I tell them the truth: my wife filed for divorce to clean me out. Why? But it backfired spectacularly when I found out she'd been cheating for 8 months. I lawyered up and burned her plan to the ground. Why? Before the fire, though, there was just grease. I stood in Bay 4, ears ringing from the sander, sweat dripping onto a crushed quarter panel. Why? I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I was thinking about paint ratios and my aching knees. This shop was my life. Why? I built it from a rented garage into a 6-bay operation, while I worked 16-hour days arguing with insurance adjusters. Why? Heather lived the life I funded. She called it supporting my dream, but lately that support looked like midday yoga and designer bags. Why? I didn't mind the spending back then. I figured that was the deal. I made the money, and she spent it. That was just how a successful marriage worked. Why? Or so I told myself while scrubbing grit from my hands. The vibration in my pocket felt innocent. I wiped my hands and checked my phone. Why? Expecting a vendor update. The screen glowed at 2:40 p.m. It wasn't a vendor, it was Heather. The message was short, brutal, and devoid of emotion. Why? Don't come home tonight. Papers are being served at your shop tomorrow. I stared at the pixels, waiting for a punchline. Why? 13 years of marriage ended with the casual effort she used to cancel Netflix. My thumb hovered over the screen, frozen in shock. Why? I slept on the leather couch in the waiting area. The next morning, the process server walked in as we opened. He didn't look like an executioner. Why? Just a bored guy in a windbreaker holding a thick envelope. He asked for Paul, handed me the stack, and walked out before I could blink. Why? My employees watched from the bay doors, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. I retreated to my office and shut the door. Why? My heart hammering against my ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. I sat at my desk and opened the packet. Why? 45 pages of legal jargon stared back. I skipped the boilerplate and went straight to the demands. She wanted everything. The house. Why both vehicles? Half the business value. And spousal support for 6 years, because she claimed she had sacrificed her career for my success. Why? I laughed out loud in the empty office. Her sacrifice was quitting retail 8 years ago, because the shop was profitable. Since then, why? Her full-time job was simply spending whatever I earned. I called my brother Isaac, a lawyer. He skimmed the petition and whistled. Why? She is going nuclear, he said. This is scorched earth. If you don't fight, she takes half of everything. I hung up and stared at the papers. Why? Something felt wrong. Not just the greed, but the precision. Heather wasn't spontaneous. She planned dinner parties months in advance. Why? She didn't just wake up and decide to blow up our marriage. She had been planning this financial heist for a very long time. I drove home in a daze. Why? The engine of my truck the only sound in the quiet driveway. The house was dark. It looked like a tomb. Why? I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. It still smelled like her vanilla perfume, a ghost of the life we had just yesterday. Why? I walked through the living room. The furniture was there, casting long shadows. The expensive throw pillows were there. But the silence was heavy. Why? Pressing against my ears. I went upstairs to the master bedroom to see the damage. The closet door was open. Her side was ravaged. Why? The designer clothes, the shoes, the bags. All gone. But on the dresser, framed photos of us smiling on vacation remained untouched. Why? She hadn't taken the sentimental things. She had taken the assets. It was a clean sweep of value. Why? Leaving behind the emotional clutter for me to deal with alone. This wasn't a heartbreak exit. It was a liquidation. Why? I moved down the hall to the spare room she used as a home office. I twisted the handle. Locked. That stopped me cold. In 13 years? Why? We had never locked doors inside the house. Privacy wasn't something we hoarded. I tried the handle again, rattling it against the frame. Nothing. Why? A cold knot formed in my stomach. If she took her clothes but locked this room, the answer to why now had to be sitting behind that painted wood. Why? I didn't search for a key. I walked back out to the truck, grabbed a flathead screwdriver from my toolbox, and marched back inside. Why? The metal felt cold and heavy in my hand. I jammed the tip into the lock mechanism on the handle. With a sharp twist and a grunt of effort, why? The internal catch snapped. The door swung open with a protesting creak. The room was dark. Why? Illuminated only by the amber streetlights filtering through the blinds. I flipped the switch. Her desk was surprisingly bare. The laptop was gone. Why? The external hard drive that held our tax returns and photos was missing too. She had scrubbed the digital footprint. I started pulling drawers open. Why? Pens, staples, old birthday cards. Nothing useful. Then I tugged on the bottom drawer. It stuck halfway, jammed by something shoved deep in the back. Why? I yanked hard, the wood screeching in protest, and pulled out a crumpled stack of papers. They were credit card statements. Why? Not from our joint account, but from a bank I didn't recognize. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the debris of my marriage, and started reading. Why? My breath hitched. The balance was staggering. Over $42,000 in charges over just 8 months. I scanned the list of merchants. Why? This wasn't yoga classes or handbags. These were charges for luxury hotels, upscale steakhouses, and spa packages booked for 2. Why? My hands started to shake. I pulled up my work calendar on my phone and compared the dates. Why? Every hotel charge aligned perfectly with nights I was working late on fleet contracts or away at towing conferences. She wasn't just spending money. Why? She was financing a completely separate life. The realization hit me harder than the divorce papers had. She hadn't left me because she was unhappy. Why? She left because she had successfully auditioned my replacement, and she used my own hard-earned money to pay for the tickets. Why? I walked into Isaac's office at 8 sharp, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a decade. My eyes burned. Why? And the coffee in my hand did nothing to touch the exhaustion deep in my bones. Why? Isaac's assistant took one look at me and quietly closed the door as I entered his workspace. I didn't say hello. Why? I just dropped the stack of crumpled credit card statements onto his pristine mahogany desk. She's cheating, I said, my voice cracking. Why? I have the proof right here. Isaac picked up the papers, scanning the highlighted lines of hotel charges and jewelry stores. He nodded slowly. Why? His face professional and unreadable. This is good work, Paul, he said, tapping a charge for the Ritz-Carlton. But in California, why? Spending money doesn't automatically kill spousal support. We call it dissipation of assets. We can get half of this 40 grand back, sure. Why? But it doesn't stop her from taking the business. He looked up, his expression grave. Why? We need something stronger than bad receipts. I sank into the leather chair, the fight draining out of me. So that's it? I asked. She cheats. Why? Spends my money on another guy, and still walks away with half my life's work. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Why? I visualized the frame machine and the paint booth being sold for scraps. I can't let her take the shop, Isaac. Why? That place is the only thing she didn't touch. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, between us. Isaac leaned back, tenting his fingers. Why? He stared at the ceiling, a frown creasing his forehead. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "Why? Do you remember the paperwork Dad made you sign?" I blinked, confused. "What paperwork?" "The loan for the first bay." Isaac shook his head. "Why?" 3 weeks before the wedding. Dad was paranoid after Mom left. He dragged you in here and made you sign a prenuptial agreement. You were furious. Why? You threw a pen at the wall. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I had completely blocked it out. I was 27, in love. Why? And insulted that my father thought Heather was after my money. I thought we shredded that? I whispered. Why? I told her it didn't matter. Isaac was already moving. He walked to the wall of filing cabinets, scanning the archived labels. Why? You might have told her that, he said, yanking a metal drawer open with a clang. But unless you filed a revocation, why? It exists. He pulled a yellowing manila folder from the back and flipped it open. My signature was there in blue ink, hurried and angry. Why? Isaac scanned the pages, his finger tracing the dense legal text. Here, he said, stopping at section 4. The infidelity clause. Why? Dad insisted on it. He read it aloud. If either party engages in extramarital affairs, why? All claims to spousal support and asset division beyond personal items are void. The words hung in the air, sharp and dangerous as a knife. Why? This changes everything, I said, adrenaline replacing fatigue. She gets nothing. No alimony. No shop. I reached for the paper. Why? But Isaac pulled it back. His expression wasn't triumphant, it was cautious. It's a shield, Paul, not a magic wand. To trigger this clause, why? Suspicion isn't enough. Credit card statements aren't enough. We need undeniable proof of sexual contact. He looked me in the eye. Why? We need to catch them in the act, or get a witness who knows. We needed a name to go with the anonymous hotel charges. Why? Isaac pulled Heather's cell phone records, which I legally accessed as the primary account holder. Why? One number appeared 53 times in the last 8 months. It pinged late at night and during my work hours. Why? Isaac typed the digits into a reverse search database while I paced the office floor. The results loaded with a soft, digital chime. Why? Blake Miller. Isaac read aloud. Real estate agent. 34 years old. The enemy finally had a face. He is married. Isaac said. Lie. Clicking through a public profile on his monitor. I leaned over his shoulder to see a photo of a smiling man with a wife and 2 young kids. Why? He looked wholesome, successful, and completely fake. His social media is locked down, Isaac noted. Why? But his wife's isn't? We scrolled through Hannah Miller's feed. It was a shrine to domestic bliss. Why? Unaware that her husband was financing secret getaways with my wife. The betrayal wasn't just mine anymore, it was expanding. Why? We can't approach Hannah yet? Isaac warned, seeing the look on my face. If we tip her off, Blake warns Hither. Why? And they destroy the evidence. He tapped his pen on the desk. We need someone who already knows. Why? Someone inside their circle. I thought of Heather's friends. They were all loyal to her, except one. April. Why? They had been inseparable until 8 months ago, right when the affair started. Then silence. April hates her now, I said. Why? Maybe she just finally got honest. I met April at a coffee shop downtown on Thursday. She looked sharper than I remembered. Why? Her soft edges replaced by a rigid, defensive posture. She didn't smile when I sat down. You look terrible, Paul, she said. Why? Stirring her black coffee. I assume you are not here to catch up on old times. I placed my hands on the table. Why? Keeping them visible to show I wasn't hiding anything. Heather filed for divorce, I said. Why? She's trying to take the shop. April's eyes narrowed instantly. I know about Blake. I continued, watching her reaction carefully. Why? I know that's why she cut you out. April let out a short, bitter laugh. She didn't cut me out. I walked away. She leaned forward. Why? Lowering her voice. I told her she was being an idiot. She was bragging about him like he was a prize. Why? Said you were just a paycheck compared to him. The words stung, but I needed the pain to focus. I need proof, April. Will you help? She hesitated. Why? Looking out the window at the passing traffic. Then she unlocked her phone and scrolled back through her gallery. Why? I kept this just in case, she said, turning the screen toward me. It was a photo of Heather and Blake at a bistro. Why? His hand resting intimately on her thigh. She sent this to me before we fought. Why she wanted to show off her new life. It was date stamped 4 months ago. It was the bullet we needed for the prenup. There is more. April said. Why? Swiping to a screenshot of a text thread. Read the last one. I squinted at the screen. It was a message from Heather. Why? Blake's lawyer friend says if we time it right, we can cash out both spouses and merge assets by summer. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just cheating. Why? It was a coordinated corporate merger of our lives. Blake and Heather weren't just sleeping together. Why? They were sharing legal strategies to destroy us both for maximum profit. Isaac was adamant. We couldn't show our hand yet. Why? If Heather knew about the prenup or the photos, she would change tactics immediately. She would claim coercion or hide assets deeper. Why? Let her think she's winning, Isaac said, sliding the evidence into a red folder. We need her arrogant. Why? We need her to walk into mediation thinking she's about to dissect a corpse. I nodded. Why? I had to become a stone wall while she threw bricks at my head. We filed a standard response. No mention of the affair. Why? No mention of the secret spending. Just a boring denial of her claims and a request for fair distribution. It was the legal equivalent of a shrug. Why? Heather's lawyer, Meredith, responded with a barrage of aggressive emails. They demanded valuations of my tools, my spray booths. Why? And even my client list. Every notification on my phone felt like a wasp sting. I answered them all with polite, delay tactic vagueness. Why? 2 weeks later, my key didn't turn in the front door. The lock was new, brass contrasting with the weathered wood. Why? She had locked me out of my own home without a court order. It was a power move designed to break me. I didn't scream or kick the door. Why? I called Isaac. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, I had an emergency order from a judge. I drove back to the house, paper in hand. Why? Ready to reclaim my space. Heather answered the door looking annoyed, not scared. She barely glanced at the court order before stepping aside. Why? Fine, she spat. But stay out of my way. I am packing. The house was a maze of cardboard boxes. She was already separating our life. Why? Labeling things. Hers. And mine. The expensive espresso machine was already in her pile. Why? She moved with the confidence of someone who had won the lottery. She had no idea the winning ticket was a foreclosure notice. Why? The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in psychological torture. We lived like ghosts in the same hallway, passing without speaking. Why? I slept in the guest room, listening to her hum while she packed my grandmother's china. Every night, I waited until her door clicked shut. Why? Then I worked. I wasn't fixing cars, I was building the master file. I organized the credit card statements, the phone logs. Why? And April's text screenshots into a narrative of her betrayal. The hardest part wasn't the silence, it was the acting. Why? When she made snide comments about my failing. Business, I had to look defeated. I had to let her believe the shop was struggling. Why? Feeding her delusion that I was desperate to settle. Why? Maybe you should sell the equipment. She suggested one morning over coffee she didn't offer to share. Why? It would cover your legal fees. I looked down at my boots. Maybe. I mumbled. Why? I just want this over. The night before the settlement conference, the house was quiet. Heather was out. Lie. Presumably celebrating her victory with Blake. I sat in the dark living room, the heavy red folder resting on my lap. Why? I felt like a soldier checking his ammunition before dawn. I had the prenup. I had the proof. I had the witnesses. Tomorrow, the mask would come off. Why? I went to the closet and pulled out my cleanest work shirt. It was time to go to war. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. Why? I sat next to Isaac, my hands resting on the red folder like it was a loaded weapon. Across the mahogany table. Why? Heather looked immaculate in a cream blazer I had paid for last month. She whispered to her lawyer, Meredith. Why? A sharp woman with glasses who had been terrorizing me via email for weeks. They looked confident, like predators eyeing a wounded gazelle. Why? The mediator, a tired man named Mr. Henderson, opened his notebook. Let's begin, he said, unaware he had started a massacre. Why? Meredith didn't waste time on pleasantries. Why? She launched into a prepared speech about Heather's standard of living and my controlling financial abuse. She slid a paper across the table listing their demands. Why? It was a ransom note dressed up in legal formatting. They wanted the house, the savings, and 40% of the collision shop's future revenue. Why? Heather watched me, waiting for me to flinch or get angry. I didn't move. I just watched her lips move, thinking about the text messages in my folder. Why? When Meredith finished, silence filled the room. Isaac cleared his throat, a dry, scratching sound. Before we address the asset division, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Why? We need to address the governing document of this marriage. He pulled the yellowed prenup from his briefcase and placed it gently in the center of the table. Why? Meredith frowned, picking it up with 2 fingers. What is this? She asked. We were not aware of any prenuptial agreement. Heather went still. Why? Her eyes locking onto my father's old handwriting. It was signed 13 years ago. Isaac explained, tapping the date stamp. Why? Paul had forgotten it too, until recently. Meredith scanned the pages frantically, her professional mask slipping. She flipped to page 7. Why? I saw her eyes widen as she read section 4. She leaned over and whispered urgently to Heather. Heather shook her head, her face pale. Why? That doesn't matter. Heather snapped, her voice too loud for the small room. That only applies if I cheated. Why? And you have absolutely no proof of that. This was the moment she hung herself. She looked at me with pure defiance, banking on her own secrecy. Why? She thought because she used cash occasionally and locked her phone, she was invisible. Lie. Are you denying any extramarital relationships? Isaac asked, giving her one last chance to fold with dignity. Of course I am, she lied. Why? Smoothing her skirt. Paul is just paranoid. He is trying to distract from the fact that he owes me millions. Meredith looked relieved. Why? Trusting her client's lie. Isaac opened the red folder. He didn't say a word. He just started dealing the papers like playing cards. Why? First came the credit card statements highlighting the hotels. Then came the phone logs showing 3 calls to Blake Miller. Finally, why? He dropped the photo April took. Heather and Blake, intertwined at the bistro, looking like a married couple. The silence in the room was heavy. Why? Suffocating. And absolute. Heather made a sound like a strangled bird. Meredith froze, her hand hovering over the damning photograph. Why? This is a violation of privacy. Heather stammered, but the fight had left her voice. Meredith wasn't arguing anymore. Why? She was reading the text screenshots about the corporate merger of their divorces. She looked at Heather with undisguised fury. Why? Her client had lied to her and led her into a legal ambush. Meredith closed her file, signaling a retreat. The prenup is clear? Isaac said. Why? His voice hard. Infidelity voids all spousal support and asset claims. You get what you came in with. Which is nothing. I finally spoke. Why? My voice sounded deeper than usual, rasping with weeks of held back anger. Here is the offer, I said, sliding a single sheet of paper forward. Why? I keep the house. I keep the shop. I keep the savings. I looked her in the eye. Why? You get $5,000 for moving expenses and your personal items. That is it, Heather gasped. $5,000. That's a joke. Why? You can't leave me with nothing. I leaned back in my chair. I am not. I am leaving you with consequences. Meredith tried to intervene. Why? But Isaac cut her off. If you don't sign this today, he said, we file for a public trial. We will subpoena Blake Miller. Why? We will subpoena his wife. These photos become public record. He pointed to the picture of Blake's hand on Heather's leg. Why? Does Blake want his real estate clients seeing this? Does his wife know yet? Heather flinched as if he had slapped her. Why? She realized her safe exit had just turned into a public execution. The fight evaporated. Heather slumped in her chair, looking small and defeated. Why? She looked at Meredith for help, but her lawyer just uncapped a pen and pushed the settlement paper toward her. Why? Sign it, Meredith whispered harshly. Before they change their minds. Heather picked up the pen. Why? Her hand shook so badly the signature was barely legible. She didn't look at me. She signed away the fortune she thought she deserved, stood up, why? And walked out of the room without a single word. I sat in my truck with the thick manila envelope, resting on the passenger seat. Why? The red folder in the office was empty now, but the war wasn't quite finished. Blake was still playing house with Hannah. Why? Safe in the lie that he was a loyal husband. It felt wrong to let him skate while I was left picking up the pieces. Why? I looked at the handwritten address. Hannah Miller. She deserved to know who she was sleeping next to every night. It wasn't about malice anymore. Why? It was about restoring the balance. I drove 3 towns over to a blue collection box outside a dormant post office. The envelope contained copies.
Why?
Not originals. The hotel receipts. The text threads about corporate mergers. The photo of Blake's hand on my wife's leg. I didn't include a note. Why? The evidence spoke a language Hannah would understand immediately. I dropped the packet into the slot and listened to the metal clank. Why? A sound like a gavel hitting a block. It was done. I didn't wait around to watch the explosion. I just drove back to my quiet house. Why? The shockwave took 10 days to hit. April called me on a Tuesday, her voice buzzing with nervous energy. Have you heard about Blake? She asked. Why? I feigned ignorance, cradling the phone between my shoulder and ear while I sanded a fender. Hannah kicked him out. April said. Why? She posted everything. The guy is radioactive. Apparently, Hannah had hired a shark of a lawyer and filed for full custody. Why? Blake's real estate partners were distancing themselves. His face had been scrubbed from the agency website. The suburban king was finally dethroned. Why? But the sweetest detail was the betrayal within the betrayal. When the pressure hit, Blake didn't stand by Heather. He folded instantly. According to April, he blamed Heather for the leak, claiming she was obsessed with him. He cut all contact, blocked her number. Why? And left her to drown in the wreckage of the life she had tried to engineer. Her golden parachute had failed to open. Why? She was supposed to land in a luxury condo with a new lover. Instead, she was free, falling into a cold reality she couldn't afford. 2 months later. Why? The dust had mostly settled. I was at the hardware store buying primer for the hallway I was finally repainting. The automatic doors whooshed open. Why? And I heard a voice that used to be the soundtrack of my life. It was shrill now, laced with panic. I froze in the paint aisle. Why? Peering through a gap in the industrial shelving. Heather stood at the returns counter. She wasn't wearing designer labels. Why? She was in sweatpants and a faded hoodie I remembered from college. She looked tired and diminished. Why? I don't have the receipt, she snapped at the teenage clerk. But I bought them here. Why? Just give me store credit. She was trying to return a bag of decorative sconces. The clerk shook his head, looking terrified. I can't, ma'am. Why? The system won't let me without a code. Heather slammed her hand on the counter. This is ridiculous. I need the money. She turned. Why? Looking for a manager, and her eyes locked onto mine. The anger on her face curdled instantly into shame, then hardened back into a defensive glare. Why? I paid for my primer and met her in the parking lot. I tried to walk past, but she blocked my path to the truck. Are you happy? She demanded. Why? Her voice shaking. You ruined everything. I stopped, resting the heavy can against my hip. I didn't file the papers, Heather. Why? You did. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You didn't have to ruin Blake. He won't even speak to me now. Why? He says I am toxic. She wiped a tear away angrily. I have nothing, Paul. You have exactly what you negotiated for, I said calmly. Why? The words hit her like stones. You wanted a new life. You just didn't expect to pay for it yourself. She stepped closer. Why? Smelling of desperation instead of vanilla perfume. I am living in my mother's guest room, she hissed. Law. Why? I am 38 years old and I can barely afford to pay for gas. Does that make you feel like a big man? I looked at her. Why? Searching for the woman I had loved for a decade. She wasn't there. It doesn't make me feel anything, I said honestly. And that was the truth. Why? The anger had evaporated, leaving only a dull pity. You gambled, Heather. You bet the house, the business, and our history on a pair of threes. Why? You lost. I unlocked my truck and climbed inside, starting the engine. She stood there in the gray afternoon light. Why? Clutching her bag of rejected returns. I didn't look back as I pulled out. I had a hallway to paint, and for the first time in years. Why? The color was my choice. 4 months later, the shop hummed with the steady rhythm of productivity. I was reviewing the quarterly books. Why? Noting the numbers were finally black. The silence in my head was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. Then the intercom buzzed, shattering the calm. Why, Paul, Beth said, her voice tight. There is a lady here. She says it's urgent. I knew before I asked. I felt a phantom twinge. Why? Like an old injury acting up. Send her in, I said, closing the ledger. Heather walked in, looking like a stranger wearing my ex-wife's face. Why? She had lost weight, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Her clothes were clean but mismatched. Why? A far cry from the boutique outfits she once coordinated. She stood in the doorway, clutching a cheap purse with white, knuckled intensity. Why? Thank you for seeing me, she said softly. Her voice lacked its old arrogance. It was thin and brittle. I didn't stand up. I just watched her. Why? Waiting for the inevitable pitch. She sat in the client chair, shrinking into the upholstery. I need help, Paul. She started, avoiding my eyes. Why? The 5,000 is gone. My mom can't support me, and nobody will hire me with this resume gap. She looked up, eyes wet with practiced tears. 13 years has to count for something. I just need a loan. Enough for an apartment deposit. She reached across the desk, palm up. Why? It was a gesture of surrender, but it felt like a trap. I waited for the anger to rise. Why? I expected to feel the burn of betrayal, or the heat of vengeance. Instead, I felt nothing. It was like looking at a wrecked car I didn't have to fix. Why? I am not a bank, Heather, I said flatly. And you aren't my wife. Her hand dropped to the desk. So you are just going to let me drown? Why? After everything. She tried to spark a fight, hoping emotional engagement would lead to financial negotiation. I refused to play.
Why?
I am not doing anything to you, I corrected. You made choices. You chose Blake. You chose to sue me. Now you are choosing to beg. I stood up. Why? Signaling the end of the meeting. My advice is free, though. Stop looking for a savior and get a job. Any job. Her face flushed red. Why? The sadness replaced by a flash of the old entitlement. You are enjoying this, she spat. No, I said, opening the door. Why? I just don't care anymore. She stormed out, the heels of her boots clicking a frantic rhythm on the linoleum. Lie. I watched her get into a rusted sedan that had seen better days. When she drove away, the tension left the room with her. Why? I sat back down and picked up my pen. The numbers in the ledger were waiting. The shop floor rumbled with the sound of grinding metal. Why? A noise that used to stress me out. Now, it sounded like music. I was finally completely free.